Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Qur'anite.com. Today is Wednesday the 19th of October 2022 and I have some thoughts, so I decided to make a video and share those thoughts to see how we go. I think like a lot of people, we're all living in the 5G soup, and so it's extremely hard to concentrate and all the rest of it, but I'm gonna do my best and see how we go. Now, I think like a lot of people recently, I've been thinking about Armageddon. It's a cheerful little thought, isn't it? But I think unlike most people, I've been thinking about it for a lot longer. And I see what's going on now, not exactly in that context, but it's expanded on my thoughts on it. And anyway, I expect I'll be sort of jumping all over the place in this. So obviously what's going on now with the war in Ukraine is a move by the New World Order and all the rest of it. And what I see is that there is this tendency in the so-called, I suppose, more conservative informational space to see Russia as some sort of bulwark against the New World Order and all the rest of it. I mean, I have to preface this by saying I think it's sort of a mid-level in terms of geopolitics as opposed to real politics. I'm certainly on Russia's side. They're certainly on the right side of the narrative for public consumption. There's no question about that. But I'm not going to talk about that particularly. I just want to say that, I mean, as somebody who lives here, there is this assumption that I guess that what we're seeing now is the move from a unipolar world to a multipolar world and all the rest of it, and somehow this is a good and a righteous thing. And I don't know, maybe it is, but I've got some thoughts. So here we are. I mean, the first one is you have to understand. Well, you don't have to understand, but my suggestion, my thought anyway, is that it's all one system. Now, I'm not talking here necessarily about secret societies and special handshakes and all the rest of it, but it is one system. If you've ever met or worked for the billionaire class and above, the kind of language which one is given, the sort of nationalist language of Russia or France or Germany or whatever it is, it doesn't apply to them. They don't think in those terms. I remember once, okay, this is anecdotal, but I was once in Monaco in a former life, having a late night conversation with he was Swedish, and he wasn't a member of the ruling elite, but he serviced the ruling elite. He was an investment advisor for these sorts of people. And in the course of the conversation, I merely suggested that it might be a good idea for Swedish people to look after Swedish people's interests. And he very politely called me a very rude name, actually. And it was interesting to me that was his response. It wasn't that he didn't laugh demonically and cackle and say ha ha ha, we're taking the world over and there's nothing you can do about it, ha ha ha. No, he didn't say that at all. His response was he completely didn't understand what I meant, and that his moral reaction, his trigger, was that that my view was somehow deviant and immoral. That one, that national interests, going back, hundreds and thousands of years, might be of any concern, and that he literally couldn't understand what I was talking about. That was what was the important takeaway for me. So you have this cast of people in all countries who have been educated, formed, shaped, made aware under a new world order heaven, breathing satanic air. That's where they come from, and it's not that they see themselves in any way as evil. They don't. They see themselves as the administrative class, and that they not only despise you, and I think I've mentioned this before, and they despise you. They don't have any connection with you, none whatsoever. So this idea of national boundaries and so on, which is something which is promoted in times of conflict, but denigrated all the rest of the time, that they don't think in those terms. I don't think so, and that's been my experience. So that's the first thing. Second thing, excuse me, I've got this constant cough. It's just never goes away. The second thing is leaving conspiracies to one side and all the rest of it, conspiracies in inverted commas. The idea that Russia is somehow, and I have an allegiance to this people. I live here. I've lived here for over 20 years. I have a great love of the language. I have a great love of the literature, most particularly. But the first time I came here, I think, was 1990 or 1991. So what you have now is, it doesn't matter what the Russian government says and thinks. There are forces outside of their control. I'll give you an example. The weaponization of women, which is a topic I've talked about a few times. They don't have any control over that. The whole when I first came here, obviously a lot of Westerners were very taken by the way that Russian women are quite feminine or appear to be, until you cross them and they'll deck you without even thinking about it. But to the untrained eye, they do seem that way, and in some ways they kind of are. But what's different here is there is no welfare state. So there is no they don't steal some money from all men to support insane women's bad life choices. Okay, so that doesn't happen. So they have to excuse me. They have to play this game. They have to be more feminine. It's an economic imperative. But despite that, over the last 20 years or so, what you see here is that the Russian youth, male and female actually, are becoming weaponized and destroyed in exactly the same way it's been going on in the West. So you see the green hair. I'm not saying this is everyone, but there is a definite contingent of society which is destroyed in the same way as in the West, and it's done through music. They'll be sort of Western leaning. They'll use the sort of feminism, all this sort of language, green hair, Dr. Martin boots, hairy legs, all of that. And it's not a lot, but it's definitely there. So that sort of spiteful mutant contingent, which is predominant in the West, among women. I mean, it's not maybe it's not 100%, but it's a lot. That sort of bag lady look that you get in Europe. That's beginning here. And it's a disease, it's a cancer. And there are reasons why this is happening. And one of the reasons is to do with technique. I really recommend everybody read Jacques' book, The Technological Society, and also his other book, Propaganda. So all that's happening here. And this is beyond the control of any government. So that's just one point. The second point is that the West and Russia and China and India and all these sort of so-called multipolar countries, if we're going to use that word, they're really just sort of tax farms, aren't they? They all have an identical philosophy, identical, and they can't not have that. They have to have that philosophy. There's no way they can have anything else. And this is what Jacques Ellul calls technique. And as I've said before, if you don't use technique is basically a highly rational use. The technique is that materialism is your God, essentially, and that efficiency is the only consideration. There is no other consideration. So if you go back to, for example, the ancient Greeks, they came up with all kinds of inventions that they didn't use because they thought they were immoral. They thought they were wrong. They could have used them, but they didn't use them because they had other considerations. In this system, there are no other considerations. Nobody stops to think whether using iPhones or whatever it is might be bad for society. Nobody cares. It makes money. We do it. So this is an example of technique. Another example of technique might be rationalization of military procedures. The fact that you can kill people really, really quickly, and war is basically an industrial process. What I'm trying to say is there are no warriors anymore. There are just, you have the industrialization of war. So it's really just a numbers game. It's a mathematical calculus who's going to win. You don't have it's not the Iliad, right? It's more noughts and ones. That's how it works, and everyone has this. And the whole point about technique is, if you don't have technique, you will be destroyed by those who do have technique, which will. So if you're a traditional society, i.e. you have some conception of God, moral responsibility, a day of judgment, that you can't just go around tearing down the monuments that your fathers put up and promoting homosexuality to your children, etc. If you have some actual moral boundaries, your society will be destroyed by any society that uses technique, which doesn't have those constraints. And yet, if you adopt technique, it will destroy you. Okay, so it's a pact with the devil. That's what it is. And what I'm trying to say is that both the East and the West have technique, and technique has got some basic postulates. This isn't an original thought. This is going back to Jacques. If you look at propaganda, I think it's page 39 if I'm not mistaken. He talks about this at the bottom of the page. He says there are basically four, and I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. There are four basic beliefs that people have. They don't know it, they don't think about it, but they have it. And the first one that pertain to technique, and this is something which would have been anathema to the vast majority of men who've ever lived over the last 10,000 years. They would not have believed this. It would have made them vomit to know what it is that we accept as axiomatically true. And it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in Western Europe, if you're part of the what do they call them? The neocons. Okay, this is just sort of this is a way of describing these people, or not. It doesn't matter, because they all believe this basically. And there are four basic postulates, and the first is progress. This idea of progress. That man started off as this benighted, well, actually started off as an amoeba, but no, he didn't start off as an amoeba. He started off as something that became to it. It's tied to the idea of evolution. Marx talks about this, but Marx, we don't care about him anymore. What I'm trying to say is capitalism, communism, they all believe exactly the same thing. This is one religion. It's just one thing. And so this idea of progress, we started off in some, poor backwater somewhere, and now we're at the apogee of development and progress. And there is a sort of a progress, as long as you don't only technique has progressed, if you want to call it that. But what it really is the destruction of all morality. That's what it is. And when I'm going back to the green-haired, girls with the hairy legs and that, they are a function of this, because if you have no moral boundaries whatsoever, then all you've got is basically expressing yourself as whatever delusional creature you want to turn into, and delusion's all you've got left. And that's why the West is collapsing to delusion. My point isn't that the West is delusional. My point is that delusion is a function of technique, and the West and the East everywhere has the same thing. And one of the postulates of this is the idea of progress. Now, the ancients would have balked at this. They wouldn't have understood what you were talking about. In fact, they would have considered it the other way, that men were it was a process of involution, a process of degeneration. That was what they understood. that there were ages that go back to the golden age, and that mankind has been collapsing. The collapse of the caste, of the religion, of the sacrifices, of all of these things. And now where we are is we've given up God as an idea, and now there's just the worship of mankind, which brings me to my second point, excuse me, which is, again, going back to Jacques, that the happiness of mankind is an unalloyed good. That's the justification. Again, going back to the ancients, they wouldn't have understood this at all. I mean, they have to go back even very far. I mean, Epictetus, well, it's not so long ago, but no, they would have thought this was insane, and it is insane. So that's the next one. Yeah, the next one is man is essentially good. This is the sort of foundation upon which all of this delusion, libtard delusion, is based. That I'm essentially good. Anything I do is good. You owe me respect because of my whatever delusions I have. You have to confirm these delusions. There are no moral constraints, and my opinion is just my opinion. You have to respect my opinion, and if I identify as a gerbil today and you don't want to accept that, well then you're a bad person. I can take you to court, take all your money, whatever it is. So, but my happiness, you have no right to stop me from being happy. And that happiness it's an axiom. The idea of happiness, again, happiness isn't really defined. I have talked about happiness before. Excuse me. My point isn't, I'm not inveighing against happiness. I mean, there are definitions for it and there are reasons for it. But what I'm trying to say is that the ancients wouldn't have accepted this. They didn't accept it as an unalloyed good. And yet the whole world accepts this. This is a kind of a Satanism. Well, it's Luciferianism, I guess. Okay, so that's the third point. The fourth point is atomism. Atomism being essentially everything is what it is. It's here for no reason. There is no prime mover. Again, the ancients would have just been bewildered at this. And yet, this is what everyone believes. Doesn't matter where you are. The Russians believe it. They all believe it. I mean, have a sort of a religion here, but really, it's not, I don't think it runs very deep, to be perfectly honest with you. If there's a choice between church and, a new off-road vehicle, I think I know which way most Russians are going to go. Just like in the West. And this is my point. My point is that it's all one thing. Okay. And this is beyond the level of conspiracy. This is beyond the level of groups. This is beyond the level of vested interests. This is the religion. So anyway, I wanted to say that. So there isn't really any difference. Well, there isn't any difference. The only advantage here is that Russia is a little bit behind. It's a little bit behind the West. It's not as degenerate as the West yet. We haven't got as many, delusional green-haired women you hear yet. But they're here. They're definitely, they're multiplying. And it's only a matter of time. So if Russia is successful in this war against the Anglo-American establishment, let's call it that. I mean, I would argue that they've been overthrown a long time ago, but who cares? It will turn into the same thing. It can't not, because this is what happens when you throw over any other moral constraint. And you can't just import moral constraints into technique. It doesn't work that way because it's inefficient. Efficiency is the only guiding precept. So anyway, I wanted to say that. The next point is, I have a list. This is quite unusual for me. The next point is that, and I see this quite a lot, especially in the sort of right-leaning, because I mean the left is just, we can just take it as axiomatic. It's totally insane. But in the right-leaning, conservative thinking sort of people, is the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I find this a little bit strange. I mean, maybe you just have two enemies. Also, I mean, if you look at this this whole thing, what we've had over X amount of hundreds of years is a collapse of the caste system. So before we had basically a theocracy. So that would be, if you want to call it that, a rule by a combination of the priesthood and the sort of knightly orders. The best description I heard of it is that it's a blind man being carried by it's a blind man. No, it's a lame man being carried by a blind man. So the lame man is the priestly orders. They can see but they can't walk, and then the knightly orders are they can walk but they can't see, and these two together are to guide you lot, okay? Because you're too stupid to make any decisions, so you need an elite that is spiritual and military in combination. All right. What's happened is that they've thrown over the priestly class. The knightly class has done this hundreds and hundreds of years ago, thinking that, okay, now it's just us, right? But the problem is, and these aren't original thoughts. If you want to read stuff like this, I would recommend René Guénon. I don't know exactly which book it's in. The Reign of Quantity or The Crisis of the Modern World, something like that. You probably find some of that there. Also Jacques again. So they throw over the priesthood, thinking, okay, now it's all for us. But the problem is that once you collapse the bridge, it just keeps collapsing. And so what we've seen is the collapse of the knightly class. So that's the end of the aristocracy. And then you go down to the next class, which is the kind of the bourgeois class. And now where we are is the age of the Sudras. So this is like the lowest caste. And I think what's happened is that the ruling elites themselves are degenerate. They're degenerate. They're lost too. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that you can't just inject a little bit of spirituality isn't an add-on to technique, because technique precludes spiritual verities because of by nature of what it is. Now you have attempts to try to do this. You have sort of like what I call brand Islam, which is a sort of a hobby rather than a life. But really, it's a deen. Actually, if you look back at Islamic culture, it's a deen in the same way as Christianity was a deen. We called it, we called it Christendom. But there is no Christendom. If you want to be a Christian now, it's just basically, it's a bit like a sort of football club that you support, or a medallion that you wear, or a badge or a sort of, one of those ribbons. It's an add-on. It isn't anything intrinsic. It can't be, because you're living in technique. So then you take the idea of this sort of nostalgic idea of Islam, for example. But they've all got mobile telephones. I mean, modern stuff. You can't pick and choose with technique. It doesn't work that way. So it is delusional, and it's damned to fail as well. So there you are. Anyway, the next that was point one. I've got a few of these. The next thing's to do with what we call the globalists, or the neocons, or the neo-libs, or whatever you want to call them. And I'm not going to get into here, which secret societies or families, or all the rest of it. I think, if you haven't done that kind of reading by now, you're kind of past that point. I don't think we have time for it. But my point is they don't care about you. They utterly despise you, and you can't blame them, really. I mean, to be honest, I don't blame them. If I was a member of their coterie, I would despise you too. Because, I mean, if you think about it, what kind of fool would you have to be to go along with this? But they've seen that they can fool you, and they enjoy it. They enjoy fooling you. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry if I sound a little bit off here, but they don't care about you, not at all. And one of the advantages, going back to Russia, one of the advantages of Russia has been, when I came to Russia at least, to live in a society where it was taken as axiomatic that the ruling elites of this country don't care about you, and you didn't have to have that conversation. It was almost like you're an idiot if you thought otherwise. I mean, you have to remember, I suggest that you consider the fact that the ruling elites in this country murdered, well, according to Solzhenitsyn, you can argue the figures, but Solzhenitsyn puts the figure, I think, at 66 million democide. Okay, well, in the Soviet Union, not just Russia, in the last century. So we're not guessing here. We know what governments are capable of, and it's all very legal. It was all very well organised, all very well documented. So, but anyway, moving on to the West, the idea has been that somehow, and I grew up in the West, so I know, I imbibed this growing up, that somehow we were immune. We were immune. The only people who die in these horrible slaughters and all the rest of it, brown people die, but we don't. Nothing bad happens to us. And then Yugoslavia happened. That was like a bit of an anomaly, white people getting killed for a change. But actually, they've been killing white people too. Look what they did to the Irish in America. Or, I mean, who do you think have been sent in waves into these wars for the ruling elites? Century after century, it's all working class white boys. So they have no favourites, none. Okay, none. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. And they'll eat each other as well. If they relax for even 5 minutes. So what I wanted to say is that they don't care about Ukraine. They don't care about the Ukrainian people. They will use them up and throw them into the meat grinder. They don't care about the Russians. They don't care about anybody. So that's it. They don't care. All right. They never have. They never have. And why would they? From their perspective, they own all of this, and you're using up their resources. And the best thing is that if they can actually kill you for a profit, that makes sense. And they'll never just kill you for no reason. They'll kill you and make a profit at the same time. And also they'll tell you that they're doing it. And the fact that you agreed to it, that puts it on you. So that's the next one. The next point is we're living through a revolution. Well, in fact, we're living through the culmination or a sort of major node of a revolution that's been going on for quite a long time. Can I read my own handwriting? I'm going to skip a point. Yeah, this is a revolution, but it's a revolution now. This is to do with the idea of waking up, which is one of my bugbears. It doesn't matter who you listen to, even some of the really intelligent people on the right, and there are one or two intelligent people on the left. There's a chap called his surname is Nixon. I'm afraid I'm blanking on his first name. It's quite unusual. I mean, he's I would say he's kind of left leaning chap. He's a black guy out of Washington. Really bright, but true that none of them get past this, because they're basically all materialists. Going back to my point about it's all one system. They've got these 4 basic postulates. They all believe it. So it doesn't matter left or right. It is really just it's menthol cigarettes or Marlboros. It just doesn't make any difference. Fundamentally, you're going to get the same cancer. Yeah, the idea of waking up. Yes, this delusional idea. What I see is happening is that there are these key events, which is actually just one agenda. So you've got, for example, what's going on in Ukraine. So you have people who've quote unquote woken up. These are the cattle on the cattle truck to the abattoir, kind of going, you mean this isn't? We're not going on a Club 30 mid holiday. No. You're going to get your throat slit. So there's a point at which people sort of quote unquote wake up. What that means is they lose, to some extent, confidence in the system that they believed in before. Now, it's not that they disavow the entire system, going back to these 4 postulates. No, they still believe in those things. They don't know that they do, but they do. But they lose faith in the intention of the rulers. And firstly, they begin to realize that the what's the word? Vitrina, what's that in English? The window dressing isn't actually, the real thing. They get that to some extent. But what they're concerned about is that they're not going to be able to maintain progress, human happiness. Human beings are basically good, and they don't probably think as far as the fourth one, under the new system. And suddenly they become a little, they get a little bit, they're shaken. And so what I've noticed is that we're living through one agenda, right, which has been going back hundreds of years, actually. But you see where people woke up at these key points. So let's say today we've got quite a lot of people in the West. They were welcoming the Ukrainians into their homes and all of this, and we love Ukraine. But when they found Olga and her two children goose-stepping around the kitchen, taking out the knives to go and kill Russians, I think even, the libtards, some of them sort of, whoa, this can't be right. The big love of the Ukraine has all kind of gone away just a little bit, obviously, as things get colder and hungrier. But you've woken up at this point, become spooked, I think is a better word. They're not really awake. They're just spooked. And suddenly they feel like, whoa, my whole life has been lost. It's all been based on nothing. Well, yeah, of course. You've been living in a cult. You're a cult member. So you're basically a cult member who's beginning to have some sort of doubts. But what they want is for it to go back to how it was. They want to go back to the pre-spooking point. And you can almost spot where people, quote unquote, woke up, and you can spot what kind of stuff that appeals to them, what they watch. I'm not going to name any names, but there are particular channels and so on that I find kind of irritating when I've come across them. But I realize that these are actually the demographic for this sort of channel, because it's to me it's so limited. It's like, oh, come on, get to the actual point. But they operate within this very, very tight bandwidth, is because their demographic are people who've just, quote unquote, woken up. So that would be a key point. Another key point would be the COVID thing. People, you've now got people telling you can only move X amount of meters outside of your home for so many hours a week or whatever it is. And suddenly they begin to realize, you know what, this isn't what I thought it was. So you get people who sort of, quote unquote, woke up at that point. Then you got the 9/11, people who realized that quite obviously the official narrative of that is complete lunacy. And it's meant to be. It's meant to be because, and I've talked about this before, is the way that it works is the way really good propaganda works is that what they do is they get you to buy into a lie, and then you're fighting yourself because you have to admit that you were wrong in order to get out of it. And now you're not fighting them, you're fighting you, and it's really hard to win that one. They know, well, this has all been modelled, this is how it works. But actually, so people woke up at this point or this point or this point, but they don't kind of get that they've always been living in this. What do you think feminism is? The weaponization of women, the destruction of the family, the destruction of education, the destruction of cultural integrity, mass immigration into all European, America, all these other countries. And that's not just a war against those people, it's against a war against the people who go into those countries, because they lose their cultures too. They have no favourites. What do you think the whole sodomite agenda is about? Voltaire said it best, that those who believe absurdities will commit atrocities. They get you, they want you to, but you bought in for that. You bought into that point of the program. You were all in favour of, oh well, gay marriage, whatever that means, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They got you there, and you knew that was wrong. You knew it then, but you went along to get along. Well, now they've got you now. See, that's the way it works. So, anyway, all that to say that. They're laughing at you. They don't really care what point you wake up. It's just too late. It doesn't matter. As long as you're operating within their frame of reference, which is the four things that I've just mentioned. You're still in the same religion as everyone in Russia is. Okay? There's no way out of it. It's a closed loop. And they know it, and so they don't care. And anyway, they've trained you now into police states and so on. So when they start shooting people and everything, you'll bend over for that as well. In fact, the new prison, people are not going to be trying to get out of it. They're going to be fighting to get into it. That's how it's going to work. So there's that. Yeah, this is just a point that came to my mind. If you look at how things are, I mean, I'm talking about how whoever they are, it doesn't really matter anymore. The kind of the rulers, the ruling elite, the sort of Mustafa Mons of of where we are, they operate as if they've got somewhere else to go. Have you noticed that? And anyway, I'm not going to belabor that point here, but you can see how important their whole globular Neil deGrasse Tyson presentation of the world is, because they certainly look to me as if they behave as if they have options. Put it that way. Anyway, yeah, I've done that one. Blah blah blah. Yeah, the disease that is allowed to can have no name. You're not allowed to mention it on YouTube. I mean, I don't monetize this channel anyway, so it doesn't matter. But I think anyway. I mean, I've been sort of shadow banned. Anyway, yeah. Let's just say COVID. Who cares? COVID was it was training wheels. It was training wheels for a police state. So they got you covering your face with a nappy, clapping, whoever it was, and blah blah blah, and gushing for this and gushing for that, and then just being terrified, and then not being able to see your children or your mother, whatever it is. Going along with a complete fast, which it really, really was. I mean, certainly some people, it was a mildly weaponized form of flu, which mainly killed people who were going to, either were very obese or had other underlying conditions, or were just old and would have died anyway. I mean, it's, huge numbers of people die every year from the common cold. So, but what this was basically beta training. They're training you, the herd, and this is across the whole world. It doesn't matter if you're in the east or the west. They have the same thing. Have it here, have it everywhere. So there you are. So you can work out whether or not, it's all very, there really is any real opposition. Which brings me to my next happy little point, which is the only thing which I think is, I mean, I think the war in Ukraine is real. It's definitely happening, and certainly there is a struggle for power. Just like, you have competing mafia groups in Chicago in the 1920s or whatever it was. They did whack each other. I mean, they agree on the basics, which is, using the population for their income, but it doesn't mean they won't whack each other. I'm sure they will, but they all use the same sort of techniques. This is my point anyway. Yeah, I think there are two things that could possibly disrupt the victory of Russia in Ukraine, and one is nuclear war, which they're talking about in the West and pushing that and pushing it. They know that Russia doesn't talk about this. Putin's never talked in these terms. They just make up this narrative, and they know that everyone's so stupid. And if you're still watching mainstream media or even most of YouTube now, they know they're going to get you. They're just going to keep bombarding you with the same stuff. And so they're kind of getting people used to that as a possibility, because that's the only way they can win is some sort of first strike. But the problem is that Russian nuclear doctrine it's not the West's. Russia has a doctrine. It's very clear: no first strike, ever. But if you hit us with anything, we send out everything. Okay, so that's the essence of deterrence. So I don't think they can use that. Unless they're going to go off to their special mansions or whatever it is they've got built the other side of Antarctica. So what's a much more likely thing, given where we are, given just standing back from the fact that you've got no gas or no electricity, or they're going to starve you, they're going to shoot you and stuff. Sort of stand back and get a bigger perspective on it. I don't know, but my feeling would be I would say COVID 2.0. I think that's where they go. I think that would disrupt. It would kill a lot of people, which is always useful. But an actual one this time. That would make more sense from a. I mean, how much money could they make from it? Yeah, they could make money from it, because they always profit from your death. They have to. It's almost like a point of principle. But they could use it as a way to obfuscate and hinder good old-fashioned military progress in Ukraine. So I don't sit in on those types of meetings, but it certainly seems to me that that's a possibility. Excuse me. But this one would be real in the sense of much more effective. Okay, which brings me on to the happy subject of all-out nuclear holocaust. There are lots of people out there who are terrified of it, and I understand. But I have to say, it does seem to be the least bad of all possible options at the moment. And the way that it's discussed, again, it's discussed within the confines of this pre-existing allegiance to the principles of technique, which is all about you being happy, see, and human happiness and progress and all of this nonsense, see. And all of that's a lie. And it's also predicated upon the idea that I'm talking about this horror of nuclear holocaust, is that it's essentially an atheistic position. It assumes that God can't create the heavens and the earth again, whereas in the Qur'an, for example, and in the Bible, this is not true. God created the heavens and the earth, and He's going to create a new one. So it presupposes that that's not the case, and it also presupposes all the things I've been talking about, that you being personally, quote unquote, happy and having more for you is an unalloyed good, and you're being denied it, and therefore that's evil and bad. I don't agree with that. And that'd be the first thing. Second thing is that never in any of these discussions that I've heard anyway about, from people who woke up at one of these key nodes within the last, say, 10 or 15, 20 years, they don't consider the big picture. They just, at that point where the new part of the agenda caused them to question whether or not they were happy and this was really progress, something like that. But they're still locked into this same thing. Doesn't matter what their political affiliations or racial affiliations or so-called religious affiliations are. They're basically locked into this, and they don't like it anymore, and they want things to go back to how they were, which is actually a weaponized form of nostalgia. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that before. That's true. Anyway, where was I? Yes, nowhere in any of this discussion is there any what's the word I'm trying to use? Any allowance for the fact that we deserve it. Nowhere. I mean, look what an evil world we're living in, where in the West, but again, this will happen everywhere else because it's a function of technique. If you have no moral boundaries, real moral boundaries, and moral boundaries can only be based on a theological basis. That you can't just morally pick and choose between this and that. It has to be. It's a matter of authority. Okay, and if you have no objective moral authority, then anything goes. And if anything goes, then you get to the kind of depravity that the West is in now, which is being a sodomite is just a life choice. And it is. They're right. It is just a life choice. But then so is being a paedophile if you have no moral constraints. Why not? Might is right. My opinion, what they call it? YOLO. YOLO. That's the answer, YOLO. What I'm trying to say is the world society is so evil that it deserves this total destruction. And not only does it deserve it, this is the least bad outcome. Because if that doesn't happen, you know where this is going. This is going to total tyranny and so on and so forth. Now, okay, people get this, but nowhere do I ever hear anybody say, we deserve this. Look what we did. We destroyed the foundation, the institutions that led to a moral society, some concept of ultimate moral culpability before God. We've taken God out of the equation. I'm not talking about particular religions here. I'm saying that we've taken any sort of serious consideration of our ultimate responsibility to our Creator out of the entire scientific, sociological, political, economic discourse and all the rest of the, ologies. There are consequences to that. And yet nowhere is there any discussion of any recognition of any, all these people complaining about, oh, maybe no more shopping for me. Yeah, maybe no more shopping for you. But there are other questions. There's a broader question to be considered. But that's nowhere is that considered. Nowhere. So, and if it let's say we get through this, you know where this is all going. I mean, we're already at the point in the West where they're grooming children to become changing their so-called sex, or so-called changing their sex. Surely nuclear holocaust is a less bad outcome than allowing this to continue. But what my point is that this is a function of technique, and technique has got its own postulates, and these postulates are nowhere questioned, nowhere. And you can't just add a bit of spirituality onto this. It doesn't work that way. Okay. Yeah, other things, for example, denial of God from the society, usury, never discussed usury. The world economic system is all based on this. I think the ruling elite know that this is where it's going, and I think what they're really pushing for is a tyranny of such totality, hermetically sealed, that they can control everything. It's all about control with them. I don't know. The weaponization of women, the destruction of everything, the atomization of society, where basically we don't really have any society anymore. So, yes, we deserve it, and also it's an inevitable outcome of any society which is based on technique. All societies are based on technique. Therefore, it's an inevitable outcome for all societies. In my view, all one can do in this context is to gain taqwa in using the Quranic parlance, which is it's a fear of God, and that this is actually the correct conclusion. And in my view at least, for what it's worth, I think that this is really the ultimate furqan. This is the division between the actual religion, which is a pre-existing acceptance of these basic postulates that I've mentioned, and the ability to step outside of that and realize that no, I'm created by God. We are ultimately responsible to God on the Day of Judgment, and you have to step. But the ability to understand that a personal repentance and the preparation for the Day of Judgment is what is required, as would have been understood by just about anybody who lived in the Middle Ages or before that. It's only since the so-called Enlightenment that we've become so evidently stupid. But this technique always has used. There's always a price to pay, and now we're paying the price. And it's not that something's gone wrong with the system, that your life, which was going to be just this sort of fluffy ride through shopping malls and Pringles and plasma screens until you eventually just sort of disappeared. No, you have a responsibility because you've been created by God, and you are insan, you are a man, a human being, and you have a responsibility. And that responsibility is that you know in yourself that you have that responsibility, no matter what. And in my personal view, we're at a time where you can still choose, and so that's where I think we are. But it's not a choice between East and West, or this block and that block. It's a choice between the postulates of technique, leaving aside whatever evil, satanic, Luciferian psychopaths are behind all of that, because they're a function of technique as well, and stepping outside and trusting in God alone, because that is It is to turn your back on technique. It's to turn your back upon those postulates. And that's the choice. It's not East versus West. It's not even about some, conspiracy or non-conspiracy, although I fully accept that, there are groups which control the money flows and they're satanic and all the rest of it. I get all that. But this is the decision, and you can make it. And you can make it. I'm not. This isn't an altar call or something. It's not a come to Jesus moment. I'm just saying that you can, because you still, while it's possible, and I think that it will cease being possible at some point, it's still just about possible to make an individual decision based on your inner soul. But I think that, and this is why I say Armageddon isn't such a bad thing, is that if they don't get it, if they manage to kind of guide the herd through what's the slalom of what's going on now, it won't be possible. I mean, look around you. What do you think 5G is? And it's everywhere. We've got it everywhere here. It's, we drove from where I live in Kazan to Grozny and back again, which is, I think, about 2,000 clicks. And you go through Kalmykia, which is this huge expanse of nothing. At no point, pretty much, was there any population of any more than about 4 people that wasn't under the umbrella of 5G. This is Russia, okay? I'm not here, to invade against Russia. It's nothing to do with that. I'm just saying that there is this one technique, and they're all using it, and they can't not use it. Any traditional society that doesn't use it will be destroyed by those that do, and as soon as you start to use it, it will destroy you. But you still have a choice. For now, my advice is to, exercise it to the best of your ability. Anyway, here ends the lesson. That's all for now. Bye for now. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Qur'an free and other books from Qur'anite.com using the button in the top right-hand corner, or buy hard copies there at 10% less than on Amazon. You can download the audio from my YouTube videos to your mobile device using the links in the drop-down below. I recommend meetquranites.com to connect with other Qur'an alone believers. I do not monetize this channel, and I make all my work available free, but you can use the link in the drop-down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short. Eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.